Do you know who needs to offer their commentary on one of history's most famous gay writers? PragerU.
I'm a Christian, a patriotic American, and a free market, shrink the government conservative, who also happens to be gay. Some unimaginative leftists like to claim that this qualifies me as a self-hating gay person.
PragerU, the fake university turned educational channel, has a book club run by Michael Knowles, a man who, in 2 previous videos, has established a history of tertiary understanding of literature, maybe even inept.
Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which is a book that men and boys in particular don't want to read.
The idea of these videos is to be showcased to conservative students on how classical literature can further the cause of conservatives, or motivate older conservatives to think a certain way.
Racist, sexist, Republican, these words are virtually interchangeable.
So how can they puppet the dead corpse of Oscar Wilde to defend the causes that put him in an early grave to begin with? Oscar Wilde is regarded as one of the greatest playwrights and writers of all time. The Importance of Being Earnest is memorable maybe most to a certain generation for being the play Mary Jane Watson did in Spider-Man 2, but of note is The Picture of Dorian Gray, a gothic novel about a cruel, hedonistic man whose sins and age are projected upon a portrait while he continues on, unblemished by time. For the late 19th century, Wilde's aestheticism was controversial, the focus on the appearances and style of a work, over maybe its substance, or maybe style as substance. However, this is not as controversial as Wilde's homosexuality, which is ultimately what killed him. You see, Wilde had many wild affairs, but this wasn't an issue until he chose to pair up with the son of the Marquess of Queensberry, Lord Alfred Douglas. The Marquess publicly called Wilde a sodomite, which led Wilde to sue for libel. This was very stupid, as many of his friends pointed out, because the investigation into that libel proved Wilde was banging the Marquis' son, as well as basically outlining Wilde's association with England's underground gay and cross-dressing community. All of this was made public, and all of it was highly illegal. The first trial levied against him left Wilde bankrupt financially, and the second is what killed him. In 1895, Wilde was convicted for gross indecency and homosexual acts, to which he was forced into hard labor for 2 years. His health suffered as a result, and his reputation was completely destroyed. After his release, he left his home in England, struggling to find any stable income for many years. He died of meningitis in the year 1900, and that illness is directly correlated to his time in hard labor. But that's Oscar Wilde, a man who was heralded as one of the greatest writers of his generation, and a figure of absolutely lavish literature. The Picture of Dorian Gray, in particular, is a work steeped in controversy, given the work's themes, which honestly run parallel to the underground gay lifestyle Wilde embodied, as well as a story about sexual repression in an era dominated by it, but also what defines cruelty. But to reduce the work to just those key points, that's reductive, as we'll get into. So what does Michael Knowles think about this extremely famous gay work of literature?
All art, says Oscar Wilde, is quite useless. So I guess there's no reason to do this show. Goodbye, everybody. I'm just joking. I think art is quite useful, and I think maybe Oscar Wilde does too, but we'll dig into exactly what he means in The Picture of Dorian Gray.
In this episode of his podcast, Knowles hosts with Will Witt. Will Witt is an influencer who has a couple of books, including Do Not Comply and How to Win Friends and Influence Enemies. Such titles that inspire confidence in me that they're works that are worth reading. He's on the Turning Point USA and PragerU channels repeatedly for going around trying to film random people caught off guard in the street and asking them random questions to promote conservative causes. He's one of those guys. Now, in case it matters to anyone, Will is still affiliated with Turning Point USA after the death of Charlie Kirk. Take that as you will. I was curious what value his books provided and saw that despite his large platform on PragerU and Turning Point, the book only had about 24 written reviews on Goodreads. And some of the examples are, well, even the positive reviews are basically just, Dennis Prager liked it. The guy seems very qualified to talk about Oscar Wilde, who he claims is his favorite writer.
You love The Picture of Dorian Gray.
I do.
I had never read this book. So it's one of those books I always meant to. It slipped through for 33 years of my life. I had not read it until my flight out here. Luckily, it's a
I
short
like to
book.
see you prepare for this kind
naturally.
of things, exactly.
Now, once again, Michael Knowles has not read the subject of the book before this video, yet Witt, the guy who apparently fears the homosexual agenda, loves this work. I'm reminded of a scene from Sinners, where they discuss how people hate black people, but love their music.
See, white folks say they like the blues just fine, they just don't like the people who make it.
I'm sure that's not at all relevant here at all, but I'm thinking of it while listening to this.
Since you've been reading it for some years longer, can you give us a 60-second summary?
Yeah, so the picture of Dorian Gray, we can get into why I love it, but essentially you have this beautiful young man who is kind of enticed by this other guy named Lord Henry. And so Lord Henry comes in and tells him all about how beauty is fleeting and you have to hold on to these things like youth, and it's much more important than intelligence, and live your life to the fullest. This is what life is all about. And there's a painter named Basil who is painting a portrait of Dorian Gray. And after Dorian is corrupted by Henry, he essentially starts to curse this painting. And eventually it's kind of Faustian, and he's making a deal with the devil and says, I hope that the painting would grow old and I would never grow old and be this beautiful forever because he's corrupted. And that's exactly what happens. And so I can give away the ending?
You can.
Okay. And in the end, eventually he finds that he does all these hedonistic things and lives very immorally. And he finds that the painting has turned into this disgusting wretch of what it originally looked like. Even though he stayed young, he ends up stabbing the painting, and then his friends and people find him later. He is now the old man that was in the painting, destroyed, and the painting is back to normal.
Okay.
After giving a fairly simplified summary of the novel, which leaves out some key plot points we'll get to in a bit, Knowles discusses the
preface. Mm-hmm. And in the preface, it's a series of epigrams. He says, "The artist is the creator of beautiful things. To reveal art and conceal the artist is art's aim. The critic is he who can translate into another manner or a new material his impression of beautiful things. The highest as the lowest form of criticism is a mode of autobiography." It goes blah, 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 blah. "There is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all. Blah, blah, blah. No artist has ethical sympathies. An ethical sympathy in an artist is an unpardonable mannerism of style, blah, 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 blah. All art is quite useless." So he says all these things, and then he spends the next 220 pages making the exact opposite argument in the actual story.
Yeah, he's very cheeky.
This quote, which is truncated, focuses on Wilde's arguing that art has no true use, while Wilde's work, Knowles claims, argues otherwise. Knowles really truncated that quote, though, as you can tell, and I think totally misunderstood it. Wilde's intention here is to argue that art serves no practical function. It's not there to give instructions. It's there to be experienced. Art is important, but that doesn't make it useful. Knowles' entire podcast is focused on finding a practical use for art, for the conservative mind, and as such lowers human experience into basic tools of practicality. And I want to highlight something specific here. What Knowles casually cuts out of his abridged quote completely changes the context. Here's the quote in whole.
"We can forgive a man for making a useful thing as long as he does not admire it. The only excuse for making a useless thing is that one admires it intensely. All art is quite useless."
That kind of changes things, doesn't it? Like the entire point of the quote. It can be argued further that Dorian's picture is an example of useful art, something that is not admired, but used. Indeed, the image absorbing Dorian's ugliness makes it practical, but also impossible to admire. It's a reflection of the worst parts of yourself. It's like a machine getting covered in grease, the more you use it. However, both of these two chuckle fucks go on, trying to argue that Wilde was being deliberately hypocritical.
Is that he's almost trying to be hypocritical to a fault to showcase like that all of this art and all these different things are very up for interpretation with people. You know what I mean? Like he says, all art is quite useless, and obviously people are going to disagree with that. And obviously he's creating art in the words that he does, and himself in his own personal life loved art, and many
He says no artist has ethical sympathies. I think he clearly does. He says there's no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. One of the key plot points here in the story for Dorian Gray is that Lord Henry gives Dorian a book that he says, I was corrupted by this book. But then in the preface he says there's no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. So what's he saying?
What Knowles doesn't get is that, again, it's not the book causing the corruption. It's just being blamed for the corruption. The characters are blaming the art for their own awful natures and actions. Now, strangely, Witt is able to figure out the message, while Knowles thinks that the book is useful for living a moral life because of the example of its protagonists.
I think in a way that he's trying to say that, okay, you have received this book. It's like someone receives Picture of Dorian Gray. They read it. Now, does that person go and live an immoral life or a very moral life or something like that from hearing it? Or is it, and they do that, is it the book's fault for doing it? Or is it the person making those choices going and doing that because they've been influenced by something?
I think someone who reads The Picture of Dorian Gray would be more inclined to live a moral life. Because I think unambiguously, sure, the characters delude themselves, some of them, Dorian and Lord Henry, they delude themselves into thinking that they can just live a hedonistic, Epicurean at best kind of aesthete lifestyle, and they can do whatever they want to anyone and it won't matter. But clearly by the end, the painting is disfigured, and then this leads to the death of the actual character Dorian. So their presuppositions weren't true. The more moral character, Basil, he's the who says, hey, stop being such a degenerate, be a good guy. He's proven right in the end.
Knowles attributes the death of Dorian to his own sins, but it's not necessarily true. It's not Dorian's sins that destroy him, it's his own hatred for his personal ugliness. See, he tries to atone in a superficial way, because despite all of his sins, he isn't actually sorry for anything he did wrong. He only apologizes to God at the very end of the novel after everyone tells him to atone. He's following other people's instructions, but he's not really atoning. He's just going through the pantomime motions of it. He isn't sorry for anything he did wrong. In fact, he might not even care about it all that much. He's just revolted by the representation of his sins, and attacks it to eradicate any sign of his own ugliness. It just happens that this is the means through which he is rendered immortal. He wanted to admire a thing that was purely useful, and thus the art reverted to its truly useless nature by becoming as beautiful as Dorian Gray was in life. They then begin discussing the character of Lord Henry, the figure who, I guess, corrupts Dorian, you can argue, though Dorian is very easily corrupted in that case.
And actually, I shouldn't even lump in Dorian Gray, the beautiful young man, and Lord Henry, who's the corrupting figure, because the painter, Basil, makes a very interesting observation at the beginning. He says, Lord Henry, you always say the most immoral things, but you never do an immoral thing. You don't practice what you preach. Your preaching is much worse than your actual habits of living.
Yeah, it's like when he talks about, when Lord Henry's talking about his wife. He says, oh, I never see my wife, and we lie to each other all the time and things like that. And Basil's like, no, you're a good husband, you know. But he says all these things, and I think Lord Henry is very based off of Oscar Wilde himself when he's writing that preface and things, is that, you know, he wanted to be this type of, it's almost like an art of making yourself into a character that is unsolvable by people.
They discuss the contradictory nature of a man who speaks of truly awful stuff, but never actually acts on it. Meanwhile, Dorian does act upon it. In actuality, the true moment Dorian is corrupted is not when Lord Henry gives him a book or talks to him about sin and beauty, but rather when he chooses to reject and torment Sybil, an actress whose heart he breaks, a woman who he's engaged with, but then rejects. You see, Sybil ends up ending her existence before Dorian can ever apologize for publicly humiliating her. And how does he humiliate her? Well, his friends go to a performance she's in, she acts poorly, and they tease him for liking her appearance because it's certainly not her talent. Sybil is so distracted by Dorian's beauty and her love for him that she messes up a little bit, but she doesn't care because Dorian is the priority of her life at that moment. And so Dorian's rejection of her so cruelly, so thoroughly, drives her to an early grave and sets off the events that follow in the novel. Dorian's actions are not driven by Lord Henry's corruption, they're driven by his own ego. And that ultimately, his response to that death motivates him to become worse. Dorian's actions make him worse. Lord Henry just gave him a slight push, and an easy person to blame for evil already well within his heart. Almost 20 years later in the novel, Sybil's brother learns that the man who drove his sister to her early grave was Dorian, and he tries to kill him. But because the book has no karmic moral drive, James dies a random meaningless death. He's shot by accident because he's spying on Dorian during a hunting trip. Someone else shoots him. thinking he was hidden game. And so this entire plot point, this point you think is going to be driving the end of the novel, becomes fruitless. Indeed, Sybil's brother is a late addition to the story, added to the novella to expand it to a full-length novel. It is entirely possible to remove that entire subplot, and the novel still flows on, showing how irrelevant these people's lives are in contrast to the decadent aristocracy. It's also undeniable that Dorian and Lord Henry have a sensual relationship, we'll say. While nothing is explicit in the text, it's hard to read what they say without concluding Dorian and Lord Henry have some alone time that's quite intimate. If not homosexual, it's at least homosocial. Even Basil, the artist who paints the picture of Dorian Gray, sees Dorian as his beautiful muse. Again, a figure of homosocial admiration. In fact, it's when Basil sees how corrupt his portrait has become with Dorian's sins, he tries to tell Dorian to repent. That's the first person to tell him to go apologize for his sins to God. And over this, Dorian kills Basil, stabbing him. This is the idealistic version of Dorian Basil saw, versus the cruel reality, one insecure, one who does not want to be told what to do, one who fears any confrontation with his actions. The good characters die unjust deaths, doing nothing wrong. By the novel's end, Lord Henry lives, while all the good people die. Lord Henry also seems completely detached from the idea that the rich can commit crimes. He thinks crime belongs to the lower levels of society. Meanwhile, Dorian commits crimes flagrantly over the course of the 20 years he is enhanced with eternal youth. Lord Henry is made to look like a bit of a moron in the book's second half, whereas in the first half, he is a Mephistopheles-esque character. However, we realize just how limited he is. He is, in effect, a complete LARPer. What morals are here? Well, there's none. It's the aesthetics. That's what drives action. Life is superficial in the book because reality is so often superficial. In many ways, I connect Dorian Gray to a different duology, a work written several years earlier by a very different writer. The novels are Justine and Juliet, two fables of morality penned by the Marquis de Sade, the same writer of the 120 Days of Sodom. The book follows a pair of sisters, one just and one cruel. The kind girl is subjected to countless humiliations and tortures, while the cruel girl gets ahead in life. That's an oversimplification of the novel, but that's the gist of it. The lesson: there is no cosmic good that rights the universe. Shit happens to good people, and good things happen to terrible people, and that's just how life is. This through line runs throughout Wilde's novel as well. It isn't virtue that saves the day. Dorian never atones, and those that pursue just causes die. But the aesthetics and the rejection of them drive wicked people to self-destruct. The image of rejecting evil is more powerful than actually rejecting evil. The aesthetics of rejecting evil are powerful, after all. It's like running a show online where you claim to be a moral, upstanding person, but just spout bigotries and complain you can't say trans slurs on a regular basis. But Michael Knowles would know nothing about that, right?
Specifically for LGBT girls with crazy colored hair, because that is
the greatest vindication of the Salem witch trials I can imagine.
like in the...
What the fuck?
I mean, you're talking about the immorality and how people would become more moral after reading this book. That's what happened to me. I mean, I picked up this book when I was in college, not because I had to for school or anything. I never went to class, but I got it just to read it. And this book
Well, you had to do something while you were skipping class.
Oh, exactly.
Might as well
read the book when I'm waking up at 11 a.m. and then start reading. But I got this book because it just looked interesting, and this book changed my life, which is why I love it so much.
Witt tells us that the book made him more moral, but how did it do that exactly?
Because when I was during that time, a young man, as many young men in this day and age are, I was living a hedonistic lifestyle. I was being immoral. I was doing things that were a complete waste of time and very nihilistic about what life was going to be. And then you read this book where you find that, hey, the main character, in the end, it doesn't turn out well for him. When he's living this type of lifestyle, it ends up corrupting his soul, and he doesn't really have that type of happiness. And so it was so influential for me to say, wow, the things that I'm doing now is going to lead me down a path of destruction. What are the things that I can do better to live a better life and achieve happiness?
Now, the idea of living a hedonistic lifestyle is a problem, apparently, which isn't really the issue here. You see, Dorian commits every vice and sin, but what makes him truly evil is how he treats people as objects of pleasure, or tools to be dismissed. Dorian's life is ruined not because he drank too much or did drugs, but because he rejects human kindness and treats people as disposable. But sure, blame the drinking, blame the drugs. That's what made Dorian ugly on the inside, not the cruel rejection of a vulnerable woman because he felt judged by his friends. In fact, that is the action that first changes the photo. Not the drinking, not the discussions of hedonism, but actively hurting Sybil. Then Michael Knowles mentions Dante.
So the book had a moral effect on you, as is alluded to in the book and contradicted by the preface. We see this in other parts of great literature. Dante, famously, in the canto of Paolo and Francesca, the adulterous lovers, it's a book that leads them to commit adultery, the Prince Galahad book. So in what's actually being presented in the story, it seems that that's what Oscar Wilde believes.
Specifically, one of the early cantos about the two lovers caught in the circle of lust. This particular section of Dante's work feeds into Dante's greater arguments about how sin derives itself from the actions of others. The higher levels of hell, that being the early levels, are sins that hurt the self mostly. The lower sections are those that hurt society and drive others into doing sin. It's social commentary on how most of the bad actions we commit are the result of others misleading people, or abusing their positions of power to dangerous results. If you want to be honest about Dante, the lovers are treated sympathetically by Dante, whereas much later he encounters the Pope hole, a hole filled with popes all being shoved face to ass deeper and deeper into the Pope hole that goes on forever. Dante feels that those who profit from sin are far worse than those who hurt themselves. Dante is sympathetic to the lovers, to the homosexuals in hell, but the false prophets, the money stealers, not so much. Do you know what he says should happen to propagandists in hell, who treat their word as higher than that of God's? Maybe Knowles should read that section of Dante's Inferno next. They then mention Wilde's imprisonment.
And if Oscar Wilde views himself as Lord Henry, the character who talks a lot worse than he actually behaves, then how do we make sense of the fact that Oscar Wilde was notoriously a libertine and was actually prosecuted and jailed for obscene homosexual behavior?
Back in his era, just existing was being seen as an obscene homosexual. The reason why the underground homosexual movement in London was so criminal was because those are the only avenues opened to homosexuals after being exposed as homosexuals. Prostitution, thievery, these were not places that you could easily elevate yourself in society from. Once you're at the bottom, you were treated as garbage. At best, you could be a spectacle. At worst, well, look what happened with Wilde. However, Will Witt's interpretation of all this is interesting, though I think it's interesting in a really weird, sheltered kind of way.
Yeah, that's why he says in the book, Lord Henry says to Dorian, he says the only way to get rid of temptation is to yield to it. I think that's why I'm saying it's very Oscar Wilde-esque to have those kinds of thing in here, but it's almost like at the end of the day, he doesn't actually even believe these things. He says them, and he has Lord Henry kind of act this out for himself and say these things, but he doesn't actually do them. And then when he sees a culture, a lot of people come after him for, the obscene acts and the things that he did, I think it's why he's often viewed so many times as such a cynical person, because he views the world that's very against him, even though he's not necessarily the type of cynical person that he puts himself out to be.
Witt's interpretation is that Wilde is rejecting society that would reject him. But at no point does Witt ever argue that what happened to Wilde was unjust.
It's kind of like a defense mechanism from the world to be this cynical person.
Yeah, I could see that. It's like when teenagers are overly sarcastic.
Yeah, exactly.
It's some kind of a social defense
like
mechanism.
An insecurity almost in a way. Yeah.
It's regarded as almost like teenage rebellion by these two guys, as opposed to someone criticizing an unjust system by illustrating the actions of the unjust. It's a very bizarre way of interpreting both what happened to Wilde and the characters Wilde created. Though again, it should come as no surprise that neither Knowles or Witt have any issue with someone being put to hard labor for Indecent Homosexuality.
Michael Knowles is a failed actor. One of the short films he starred in. Yeah. No, Michael Knowles has starred in, like, not gay porn, but he's starred in, like, films where he's played a gay guy. Has had implied sex.
YA plus person in your life a gift this Pride season?
Nope.
How about this? It's called Leave Us the F Alone.
He's trying to make this like a crazy thing, like they're creating all these rules. They just want you to leave them alone, bro.
Knowles then examines the ideas of beauty in the work, trying to find meaning of what the beauty leads to.
What does Oscar Wilde think about love and beauty? You know, in the whole book is about beauty, right? It's about this beautiful young man who is posing. He's sitting for this painter, and he's the subject of the greatest work that this painter has ever made. And there's all sorts of homoerotic admiration of this guy. And yet the beauty never seems to lead anywhere. It just leads to a long series of affairs and degradation, you know, that leads him to an opium den, and he becomes a murderer eventually. He, you know, all sorts of degradations, but there's no culmination of it. You know, one would hope that you find a beautiful woman, you marry her, you have some kids, you live a good long life together, then they get married and they have kids, and that's, but for these guys, it's just beauty for beauty's sake. And it goes nowhere.
He tries to reframe Wilde's book as a conservative marriage fantasy, and can't wrap his mind around the idea that beauty without some productive value can still exist. What value is beautiful people if not to produce babies with them? Well, there's a lot of reasons why. Witt then has an actually decent interpretation of the book in theory.
Yeah, so there's a line also in the preface that I think answers that a lot, where he says, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. And then he says, those who find beautiful meanings in beautiful things are the cultivated. For them, there is hope. And so I think he's talking about here in the sense that there are actual beautiful things that you can see, that you can feel. I think there's a lot of mentions about flowers in Dorian Gray, because a flower is fleeting. It's not always going to be there, but it's beautiful for a time. And so it's compared a lot to Dorian and all of that. But there are objectively beautiful things that are out there that you can see. And those who find those types of things beautiful and can recognize that they're beautiful, according to Oscar Wilde, are the people who have hope in this world. The people who are actually the elect that he says.
Isn't that depressing? That part really depresses me, you know, and
which is why he's so cynical with these things.
But both he and Knowles find the idea of beauty being this fleeting thing as tragic. They don't seem to understand the inherently disturbing concept of a painting that changes and a living being who remains static. A flower is beautiful because it does not last. Dorian is frightening because he does. It's here that Knowles discusses Sybil, finally. It took a while. Knowles completely misses the point of everything involving Sybil. Who's shocked by this?
Yes, but though as we were discussing earlier, you can't quite tell if the cynicism is put on, you know, is it ironic or not? Yeah. But even when Dorian falls in love with the young actress, and he goes and he sees her every single night, he buys her roses, and she's of much lower station, but he's a very wealthy young man, and he proposes marriage to her. And he brings his buddies, the painter and the corrupting lord, and they come watch, and she gives a terrible performance. But she's actually happy that she gave a terrible performance, because she says,
so in love.
She says, Dorian, I can't profess my love for Romeo. I can't pretend anymore. I got the real thing. Isn't that so wonderful, Dorian? I don't need to be an actress anymore. This love is the real thing. He's disgusted by that. So disgusted that he says, no, if you can't be an actress, if we're going to get the real thing now, and we're not going to get the show and the performance, you're dead to me. And she goes off and kills herself. How perverse that is.
He sees a story where a cruel person's descent into violence starts with them causing the death of another, who uses the incident to justify his own cruelty moving forward. He believes himself to be above feeling. He can't feel bad for his actions because he is immortal. He is untouchable. He is immoral because he's convinced of it. What is so fascinating is seeing Witt explain basic ideas that Wilde is not Dorian Gray.
I mean, this philosophy of art for art's sake, this aesthetic philosophy we use that phrase now in popular culture as though it were some profound bit of wisdom or some ideal worth pursuing. I think it's a joke. I think it's totally ridiculous. I mean, I guess it's the MGM motto, but no, you want art for the sake of the good and the true and the beautiful, the transcendentals, but you want there to be a purpose to something. You want to go somewhere. You want to be edified. You want to be sanctified. For goodness sakes, you want to go to heaven. You don't want to just languish around in parlors all day, pitching banal trivialities to one another, do you?
No, of course not.
I can't help but think about that Ian McKellen acting clip, the one where he has to explain basic acting.
I imagined what it would be like to be a wizard, and then I pretended and acted in that way on the day.
Yeah.
And how did I know what to say? The words were written down for me in a script.
He is writing a story. He's not literally Dorian Gray. One can make the argument that Sybil, as an actor, projects her own sense of dissatisfaction with life, being her station, her isolation, her loneliness, into her art. Dorian, therefore, represents the possibility of life becoming better for her. And when Dorian rejects her, she is left with art that is lacking in comparison to the love she felt, and a life that is now renewed with bleakness. As a result, she takes her own life. This is one way of seeing the story, that without art as an escape and without life as a possibility of a better future, she has nothing left. Knowles, of course, does not read into it all that much. He does not seem to understand or inquire why a character who is an actor whose acting fails because she has happiness in life might impact her story, might impact the discussions around art and reality. This is oddest because Knowles is a former actor. You'd think he would maybe connect to an actor's struggle, the type of mindset an actor might have, all the more. But he seems deeply incurious about Sybil's struggle. Knowles then goes on a tangent about private vices, which apparently he thinks this book is all about.
Probably my favorite line in the book, you mentioned there are all these funny little couplets and epigrams and, that are all charming. My favorite line is not one of those, though. It's a point that maybe gave Oscar Wilde a little bit of pause in his own personal life. People talk sometimes of secret vices. There are no such things. If a wretched man has a vice, it shows itself in the lines of his mouth, the droop of his eyelids, the molding of his hands even. Somebody, I won't mention his name, but you know him, came to me last year to have his portrait done. And this is Basil, the painter, describing this. We do that today. And not just on the radical left or the atheists, but even on the right. People talk about, there are private vices. And then there's our public behavior. And, stop concerning yourself with what people do in the bedroom or whatever. But this whole book, ironically, is written by Oscar Wilde, Lived a Wild Life.
Yeah.
This whole book is about how what you do in the bedroom affects what happens in the streets. There's no such thing as a secret vice.
Yeah.
You're going to wear it on your face. You're going to wear it in your demeanor. It's going to warp your soul. It's going to turn you ultimately into a degenerate, potentially drug-addicted murderer.
What you do in private affects the public, affects reality? Well, no, Knowles. Homosexuality is not Dorian's sin, it's the murder and cruelty. That's what makes him ugly. Him doing drugs privately, who cares? It's the tormenting prostitutes. That's the problem. See, Dorian is being all bisexual for that first half of the book, right? And it doesn't really change his portrait. It's only when he hurts Sybil the first change takes place in the portrait. It's him doing something intentionally cruel to someone else. Nothing Lord Henry says to Dorian does anything. Basil and Dorian giving each other fuck me eyes doesn't change the portrait. It's Dorian's pettiness and selfishness that does something. But Witt hears Knowles go, oh yeah, this guy's private bedroom's antics leads him being a murderer, and goes, yeah, that sounds right.
Exactly. That happens every time. What's the libertarian answer for that?
Yeah.
But he's exactly right. And I think you're exactly right there, and that these things do leak out. And if we're not careful and we keep saying that, it's, someone else's problem, we can do it wherever we want, just as long as I'm not involving someone else, well, eventually that's how you have the place that we are in the world today, where you have all of these degenerate and horrible things happening in the world because it's a slippery slope of saying, well, this is okay here, but no, that's not okay. And now you keep saying one little thing is okay. Over a period of time, you're going to have this culture that views hedonism and immorality as new gods almost.
Yeah, can't be the time he drove a girl to her death because his friends laughed at her performance in Shakespeare. Nope, it's gotta be the gay thing. No, the fact that gay people exist is not why there's degeneracy in the world. The actions the book focuses on most are Dorian's acts of interpersonal cruelty and how that harms people as a whole. The exploitation of the poor for his own personal vices. The motivation is his superficiality, to declare himself untouchable from vice. It's not being okay with being gay, it's the fact he hurts people. That's what makes him a villain. And there's no connection to his homosexuality, especially considering he's mostly attacking female prostitutes.
Then again, this is a guy who refused to go to Walmart after they had a gay flag in a commercial once.
The world needs to hear what you have to say and your story.
Wait, is that Walmart? Is that what the sun is? Hello, producers, is anyone listening in there? What is the company? That is Walmart. I thought Walmart was conservative. I thought that's why the libs hate Walmart. Wow, this Pride Month, Target was probably less gay than Walmart. Okay, you know what? Good, fine. I don't even need to worry about not going to Walmart. Next one.
What a sad life it must be if the acknowledgement that people unlike you exist is enough to scare you off of a company, a corporate structure designed just to sell you shit, with no actual warmth of humanity behind it. At least when the left boycotts a company, it's because of, like, the company being fucked up, specifically to its employees.
Knowles then asks why people read Wilde at all.
When this came out, it caused a big stir, and there were accusations that the book itself was obscene. If the plot of the story bears out that books can have real moral consequences, then what do we make of the fact that the first publisher, takes out 500 words? Then they put some words back in. And then Oscar Wilde rewrites it. And then just about 10, 15 years ago, there was an original edition that was discovered that was even more, I think it was more homoerotic, I think that was specifically what was taken out, than the published version. So they put that back in. There must be 5 different versions of this book out there. Why do people still read Oscar Wilde 100 years later, 120 years later now?
And Witt falls back on, ironically, the aesthetics of his language.
You know, he has a way of writing that I think really just makes you say, wow, the English language is really actually incredible. It feels like poetry reading it. And having you read the dialogue that they have between the characters and you say, people don't talk like this at all anymore, you know, and maybe they didn't even talk like that then, but he's making it into almost like a drama with how they talk. And it's gorgeous in the things that you read.
So there's something profound about that when you get to the plot of the story, which is you were enchanted by the beauty of the art and the message, edifying or corrupting, we can debate that, seeped in that way. Much as all of these men were enchanted by the beauty of Dorian Gray, and these women whose lives were ruined, who became ruined women who ended up at whorehouses and opium dens.
Even Knowles sees the irony of this story, and then argues, well, what if these books inspire bad behavior, and they go off on a tangent?
There is a real danger there, because you're enchanted with those words on the page. Well, what if the message really were obscene? What if instead of this book having had the effect of edifying you, what if it had actually just encouraged you to be a hedonist?
Yeah.
Talking about how they are all these dirty women who shouldn't be admired.
And there's plenty of books and all sorts of, I mean, you have these movies and stuff that come out today are these women who are in the mainstream, who are beautiful women in many respects, but are not women who are to be heralded as what we should be looking for as the pinnacle of beauty or a standard for.
Did you guys both forget by chance the book's message is about how awful it is to treat people as superficial objects? Using this book as a self-help book to drop hedonism appears to have only made you as superficial as Dorian, to do the same things Dorian does. I don't think this book helped you at all if you claim it to be, and you claim this is your reaction to it. In some ways, Witt understands the book, but in many more ways, he is living the book. And then, okay, Jesus Christ, I'm not making this up. They compare Oscar Wilde's persecution and forced censorship to people getting mad at them for mocking trans people.
A lot of people point to Oscar Wilde as an example of why we need a total defense of absolute free speech, no censorship whatsoever. The irony, though, of course, is the reason Oscar Wilde got prosecuted for obscene behavior is because he sued a man for defamation, for insinuating that he was a little light in the loafers, which then it turned out he was, and ended up getting prosecuted for it. But Oscar Wilde was not for absolute total free speech to say whatever you want. And the book went through a lot of revisions and bouts of censorship.
Well, that's how it goes a lot of the time. I mean, even think about, you're in the conservative movement talking about the news, I'm talking about the news. There are things that we have to almost censor ourselves on, and sometimes for our audience and things like that, occasionally. And
the transgenders you're talking about.
Exactly.
You can't say it.
No,
you got to dance around it.
They get too mad. It might seem, when you're looking at it from above, just at humanity in general, that these things seem very ethical and it should just be all freedom and everything like this. But people have responsibilities. People have standards. People have things that shouldn't be out there for certain things. And Oscar Wilde understood that, even though he wouldn't write it.
Jesus Christ, do I have to explain this one? You are using the words of a queer man who died because he was, to justify silencing and punishing other people for who they are. This is a self-persecution crybaby fest. Oh no, they made fun of me for saying a trans joke. That's the same as being imprisoned for my identity, right?
I think it's a great book for people to read in a time today where hedonism and immorality are seen as the answers to a meaningless life. Where people today in the West do not have meaning, they do not have purpose. It's why all these girlfriends are asking young men, do you think about ancient Rome? And they all say yes, because where else are they deriving any sort of meaning or inspiration or a quest adventure in their lives? They have nothing. They're answering emails all day and living in some urban city, and they're living hedonistic lives just like everyone else. You read a book like Dorian Gray, which it was for me, when you're living in this sort of very stale and immoral lifestyle, it says, hey, that's not worth it. Maybe there's another answer.
So it shows you what not to do.
Hedonism is not the alternative to meaning. The reason men are without direction is that they don't know how to function without rigid order, in some cases. People find meaning not through pre-created goals, but by whatever you find personally powerful. Without order narrowing your options, you might not find that thing. But alternatively, cruel words can do damage. The book shows us that with Sybil. She dies because of it. So Knowles lamenting he can't insult trans people after that. It just comes across as beyond callous and frankly into fucking stupid. You missed the point of the book where it showed the words you say can hurt people.
I liked it. I had a lovely flight out here today. I enjoyed the book. Didn't change my life. I found it perfectly fine, and I would read it again.
Well, you're a pinnacle of morality.
I've said it for years.
So
I'm very proud of my humility.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it a great book?
I think it's a great book. I think it has its issues. I think the cynicism in it and the irony almost in it can be off-putting to people when they're trying to make sense of what it actually all means.
But or attractive. I don't know. I find it very attractive.
I do as well.
I'd love to go get a drink with Oscar Wilde. It'd probably be a charming evening.
Yeah.
Knowles ironically saying he would love to have a drink with Wilde, while simultaneously talking about oppressing people who Wilde would treat as peers, illustrates the disconnect conservatives have from reality. I wonder if he has any understanding how his own words would result in someone being driven to their doom, much like how Dorian's words drive Sybil to her doom.
For a quick example of that, consider the case of Charlotte Fosgate, a young trans girl who was driven to meet her own ends early due to online harassment and personal bullying. When she posted a note on Twitter that indicated that she was going to, well, you can see, a lot of people decided to harass her after her death just to make fun of the fact she ended her own life. Repeatedly, it became a punching bag on the right. What jokes do you feel so censored by? Jokes like this? Mocking the dead after they've already been buried?
Knowles walks away saying the book tells people aestheticism is bad. The book written by an aestheticist. Not shocking he wouldn't get that one. But then he decides to ask, what does Dorian Gray think about God?
But then, okay, we're told, and I think reasonable readers would come to the conclusion, hedonism, no good. Epicureanism, no good. Aestheticism, no good. But what about religion?
Well, he worships himself. He has an entire idol to his face. What do you think he thinks of God?
The book does finally touch up on religion, right? Why don't you it's not too late. Just confess your sins, Dorian. It's not too late. Just ask forgiveness. You know, your sins are scarlet red, but they'll be washed away from you. Basil pleading with his muse, please don't. And Dorian says, no, it's too late. It reminded me of people who cynically and glibly will say, well, Michael, look, if Christianity is true, I can just have a deathbed confession. So I can live it up now, go do whatever I want, very hedonistic lifestyle. Then when I'm on my deathbed, I'm sure I'm guaranteed to get that, right? You know, and there's no way I'll ever die suddenly or anything. And I'm going to lie there and I'll just convert at the very last minute. And then we'll be all good. I'll go to heaven. Maybe. But what happened to Dorian Gray here is he was so hardened. He said, I just can't. I am so hardened. My soul and behavior have been so shaped by my hedonism because man is a habitual creature. Sorry, Basil, can't happen. You know, I once heard that the trick of the devil is first to convince you that sin is no big deal. And then immediately once you commit the sin, to convince you that it's such a big deal it can never be forgiven. That's what Dorian Gray gets to at the end.
Knowles points out that Dorian refuses to confess because he is too hardened by experience, and that is in part true, but the story ends with him superficially trying to atone, only he can't, because he isn't sorry for it. Ironically, Knowles' examples of a deathbed confessional is similar to what Dorian does, but they're only asking for forgiveness at the end. They're not sorry for their actions, they just want a ticket to heaven. But they're not really atoning for their sins. This is Wilde mocking that idea, that if you apologize at the end, you're fine. Well, guess what? If you ain't fucking sorry, you're not really fucking apologizing, are you? Also, and this is important to point out again, Dorian isn't just a hedonist. He's a fucking murderer. And Knowles forgets to mention that Dorian murders Basil after the exchange about forgiveness and all that.
Yeah, I mean, he thinks that there is no hope for him. Unfortunately, Dorian Gray believes that there is no hope for him because of all the things that he did. But that's not the way that people should be looking at lives themselves, especially if they're looking at it from a place from God coming and saving people. I don't believe in the deathbed confession. I don't think you can just say that, oh, I believe in God now and you're going to be saved, because you're not the one who is really doing that. Jesus is the one who died for your sins to save you, and he's the one who knows your heart.
If it's sincere, though, you would believe in it.
Well, if the person is actually sincere, but how can a person be sincere really in that type of moment like that?
It's not that Dorian Gray didn't believe there's hope for him. It's that Dorian Gray wasn't sad about what he did. He didn't give a shit. That's why he's a reprehensible character. He can't be saved because he doesn't want to be saved. Not really, anyway. He just wants to have the picture look pretty. But he doesn't care about people he's hurt along the way. He just cares about the aesthetics of how he appears. And he only gets really scared when he finds out people are after him like James. That drives him to act more irrationally, the fear of him being hurt. Again, it's all about Dorian, how Dorian feels about his own nature. He doesn't give a shit about anyone else but himself, and that's what makes him a monster. Knowles then goes on a tangent about falling for the liberal dream that nothing matters and you get to do whatever you want.
It ends with this message of, hey, here's what you shouldn't do. Here's the fast track to a bad life. I remember, not to tell tales out of school, but in a little more licentious periods of my life, I bought all of the liberal claptrap. That, oh, there's no such thing as morality, God doesn't exist, it's no big deal, just do whatever you want, you know, and that's very sophisticated, and that's how everyone lives now. And it never works out. In the end. Maybe it works out in the short run, but...
He insists that things never work out for hedonists who do whatever they want. But we all know that isn't true, and the proof it isn't true is that we can look at the White House right now and see who failed their way upwards. Or look at Jeffrey Epstein's list of contacts. How many of them are actually suffering for the consequences of their actions, abusing the small, much like how Dorian Gray abused the small in his story? All of this becomes even more ironic when you look at the right's current idol, Clavicular, a man who has ingested a cocktail of drugs and performance-enhancing solutions to looks max.
That's kind of funny that you gave up your butt in like 5 minutes of eating me.
I gave up my butt?
Yeah. Alright, I thought of a nickname for you. Cum Dumpster. What do you think?
How original.
Huh?
How original.
Yeah.
He is a modern Dorian Gray, a man more obsessed with aesthetics than his own ethics. The only difference between Clavicular and Dorian Gray is that Dorian Gray, at least, enjoyed the touch of a woman. Or a man. I don't think Clavicular really enjoys anything he does. Because he's so obsessed with the aesthetics, he's forgotten how to experience joy. Ironically, Knowles listens to this message about how the physical manifests what the soul experiences, and takes this as almost literal proof that physicality reflects in some way the inner workings of the soul.
You can see people be disfigured by that. They look, even the picture of him, becomes like a satyr, like a demon-possessed kind of monster. That happened because of his behavior. Oscar Wilde focuses on the physical. He said, no, we all think that, the physical is trivial and the metaphysical is what really matters.
Mm-hmm.
That's the astonishing thing.
Only shallow people don't judge based on looks.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, and it was so brilliant because it occurs to me, we live in this very Gnostic age where we think, the true self has nothing to do with the body and we're just, we're all just spirits vibing, man. It's very New Agey. But that's not what our civilization traditionally believes. Christianity, in fact, hinges on the incarnation. The flesh is very, very important to our civilization and the religion that animates it. So much so that Tertullian, one of the early great Christian writers, says, the flesh is the hinge of salvation. And if you seriously believe that you can totally divorce the flesh, the physical world, from the soul and the metaphysical world, you're in for a bad surprise, and you can read about it at the end of this book.
I guess Knowles thinks that if you're disabled or physically unfit or have a blemish, that's a moral failing. Beautiful people are inherently good. This begs the question what he thinks about, certain world leaders, but I digress. But no, Witt argues that fat people are the problem.
Yeah, now you have all these movements that are like these fat positivity movements and FatCon and stuff like that say, these things don't matter. Being unhealthy doesn't matter. Objective standards of beauty don't matter. Let me just go throw some paint on the Mona Lisa real quick. And you live in a world where if you don't value the things that traditionally throughout human history have been valued and that God valued and put these types of standards on, then you have a society that doesn't know where to go forward. And if society doesn't know where to go forward, then they only go backwards, but they call it progressivism.
Right.
I find it telling how whenever these guys are confronted with men doing horrible, selfish things that hurt people, their immediate association is with people who they perceive as indulgent in private pleasures, things that don't actually hurt anyone else. When the book actively shows, no, the problem is hurting people, not just doing things for your own personal satisfaction. But I guess it's easier to argue that the people you don't find attractive are really the demons of the story and not, the people actively hurting people, because those are the people you actively prop up, aren't they?
Have you been dying to ride Dragon Racers Rally at Universal's Epic Universe, but you weren't sure if you'd fit?
I feel like I asked this question in most videos, but what am I watching here?
It's a person getting on a ride. Have you never gone on a ride before? And indeed, Knowles has a further point about how pleasure is the ultimate evil, as opposed to quote-unquote true happiness, which is, as he perceives it, starting a family, being godly, etc.
And by the end of the book, Dorian Gray, he's paranoid, he thinks everyone's trying to get him and kill him, he's locking himself up in his room, this is a man who all he was pursuing was pleasure, not happiness.
Mm-hmm.
That's another point made several times in the book.
Yeah.
No, the best thing in life is not happiness. That's something Aristotle might talk about. Eudaimonia, human flourishing. Pleasure, just pure sensual pleasure. And so he should be totally relaxed, right? And yet he's not. He's completely discomforted. He's completely disfigured. And he's agitated to the point of madness, and he kills himself at the end by stabbing the painting.
Mm-hmm.
Not the literal collection of Dorian Grays that find themselves worshipped by the right or by pop culture. It's the people who play video games and have fun doing it, who find enjoyment in their lives, who are the problem.
Well, where does pleasure get you in a society? What does pleasure mean in the end? You're going to live a life and say, how much pleasure did I have? It's like these young men in there with many of the video games that they play nowadays, and they have these like online avatars, you know what I'm talking about? And they build them up with clothes and levels and all sorts of stuff. They're heroes that they have. And it's like at the end of your life, this pleasure that you had making this character, does that matter at all in the long run of what you're doing versus like setting your life going towards something good?
If playing a video game makes you happy, fucking play a video game. If building characters in Dungeons & Dragons or building a deck in Magic the Gathering makes you personally happy, then fucking do it. What's with the right's allergy to personal happiness? If you're someone who's a professional and you use your hard-earned money to, I don't know, commission furry avatars for yourself, good for fucking you. Do what makes you happy.
I've gotten so much faster, my lines are more confident, my output is cracked. I'll go from not drawing for a couple of days to filling 12 pages in a sitting. Been riding a creative high for months now, and all of this energy plus some good old-fashioned ADHD has led me down a couple creative rabbit holes.
They act like the plus-sized park hoppers are some bizarre anomaly for heavy-set people having fun in a theme park, when the only people I think are really bizarre are people like you who judge other people for just having fun with their own hard-earned cash. Like, it's because they're still overweight when they go to the theme park? It's because you have to see their bodies? Is it that you think they shouldn't have fun until they've done work to better themselves in your eyes? Well, how miserable is your life if your happiness depends on other people conforming to your views? Life sucks enough. How dare people have fun sometimes? What is with this self-sabotaging, self-sacrificing bullshit I'm seeing right now? And conflating the actions of Dorian Gray, a guy who abused women, abused men, murdered people, as the avatar for their personal vendetta against just having fun after a long day. How dare you have fun? And if you don't believe me, he goes on to argue that being happy is bad.
You know, it's almost like, I think there's also a thing with happiness, that happiness isn't always the meter that we should be measuring lives on either. You know, that it's not just pleasure, not just happiness, but it's almost like how much suffering do you go through in a way that helps you learn, in a way that helps you be a good person. And I think that is somewhat missing from the book and asking for my review of it, and is also missing in the lives of so many young men today in America.
Witt concludes that suffering isn't needed to enjoy a good life. I am sure when Oscar Wilde was being tortured through hard labor, that suffering was also building character. I'm very sure. So, what did we actually learn from any of this?
What did we learn, Palmer?
I don't know, sir.
I don't fucking know either.
Simply put, PragerU does not understand how to actually look at something beyond their own perspective. By criticizing Dorian Gray, a novel with messages so fucking obvious that a preschooler can figure it out, they inadvertently reestablish that they are not repulsed by Dorian Gray, they want to be Dorian Gray. They want to be above the morals of their actions. They want to have pesky words get in the way of their fun. They don't want people criticizing them. They don't want to be punished. They don't want a portrait of themselves that grows more corrupt as they themselves become more corrupt. What they want is someone to make a nice pretty picture for them and to tell them everything is fine, to be revered for aesthetics of their actions. But the reality simply is this. You have a painting in your home currently rotting in the attic. You may never experience any consequence for your actions, but one day you will look into that painting and feel nothing but despair over what you have become for your words. You may only express it privately and never publicly, but I guarantee you, your life will be driven by the knowledge that there is a painting in your home currently fermenting with the sins of your actions. And if there is a God when you meet him, eventually, he will bring up that painting and ask if you truly are sorry for all the people you hurt along the way.